Welcome to the Podwave Pulse. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into simple living.
Yeah.
And, we're going to be kind of looking at some really practical strategies and the benefits that they can bring to your life for creating a happier and more intentional life.
Absolutely.
And looking at some of the source material that we have, it kind of examines how modern life often emphasizes things that can lead to,
Oh, yeah.
stress and dissatisfaction.
This is a big one.
Yeah. So we're going to see how these small shifts can lead to big rewards in well-being.
Huge rewards.
Yeah.
Big time.
And it's all about, moving away from what's described as this headless consumption.
Headless consumption.
Right.
Yeah, that's a new term for me,
Yeah.
but it makes a lot of sense.
It makes a lot of sense when you kind of look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, and the way that it's described in the source material
Yeah.
is it's just this mindless accumulation of material goods that's driven by these societal pressures to,
Yep.
just constantly acquire things.
Absolutely. And it's so insidious too, because it's,
Right.
you don't even realize it's happening.
Right.
You get caught up in it.
Exactly.
And next thing you know, you're drowning in stuff.
Right. And, we see how it can lead us to prioritize these possessions over our experiences and our relationships.
Right.
Which, in the end, are the things that really matter.
Yeah. It's important to be mindful of that.
Yeah. So let's kind of unpack this a little bit more.
Sure.
This idea of headless consumption.
Yeah.
It might sound like kind of strong language.
Yeah, it does a little bit.
It does. But, the source material is
Yeah.
painting a pretty clear picture here
Yeah.
of, this almost unconscious way
It really is.
that
right.
we can, start gathering all this material goods, and it's fueled by, societal expectations and all this stuff. And it's
Yeah.
leading us to, value what we own more than these experiences that we have. Yeah. And the relationships that we cherish.
Right.
So,
It's almost like we're putting the cart before the horse.
yeah, totally.
We're focused on the wrong things.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not really leading to genuine happiness. It's a very superficial kind of happiness.
Right. So, okay, so we've identified the problem here, right? This headless consumption.
Right.
But what can we do about it?
Well, luckily.
Let's get down to the brass tacks here.
Yeah.
What are some of these practical strategies
Yeah, what are the actionable steps?
for simplifying our lives?
Absolute.
What are the sources highlighting?
So one of the first things that they really emphasize
Yeah.
is decluttering
Okay.
and minimalism.
Okay.
It's about really kind of taking stock of what you have
Yeah.
and getting rid of anything that's not truly serving you.
Okay.
And that can be physical possessions.
Mm-hmm.
It could be commitments.
Mm-hmm.
It can even be like mental clutter, like
Right.
limiting your exposure to, negative news or social media,
Yeah.
things like that.
So it's kind of like creating space.
Exactly. It's about creating space in your life
Both physically and mentally.
for the things that really matter,
Okay. So how do we even approach that?
Yeah.
Decluttering can be a daunting task for a lot of people.
It can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But one thing that the sources suggest
Yeah.
is to start small.
Okay.
You don't have to do everything at once.
Okay.
So
pick a drawer.
yeah, pick a drawer, pick a closet.
Okay.
Even just dedicating 20 minutes a week
Okay.
to a specific area
That seems manageable.
can make a big difference.
Okay.
And the research actually shows that there's a direct correlation
Really?
between visual clutter
Huh.
and increased cortisol levels,
Interesting.
which is the stress hormone.
Wow.
So just by tidying up your desk,
Yeah.
you can actually reduce your stress levels.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
It's amazing how these little things can make such a big impact.
absolutely. And, and then as you start to declutter your physical space,
Mm.
it kind of naturally starts to lead to a more minimalist mindset.
Okay.
It's not just about getting rid of stuff.
Right.
It's about, being more intentional
Yeah.
about what you bring into your life in the first place.
Okay, so it's not just this outward thing
Yeah.
where you're just getting rid of stuff, but it's an inward.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. It's a shift in perspective,
Okay.
And
how do you cultivate that shift, I guess?
well, the sources talk about really reflecting on what truly brings you happiness.
Okay.
What are your values?
Mhm.
What are your priorities?
Yeah.
And then using that as a guide
Okay.
to make decisions about what you allow into your life.
So kind of defining your own version of enough.
Exactly.
Right.
Because enough is different for everyone.
Yeah. And it's not something that someone else can tell you.
Yeah.
Right.
Something you have to figure out for yourself.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've decluttered our homes.
Yeah.
We've, got this minimalist mindset.
Mm-hmm.
What's next?
Well, the next big piece
Okay.
is mindful consumption.
Okay.
And this is really about
Yeah.
making intentional choices about what we buy.
Okay.
It's the opposite of that headless consumption
Right.
we were talking about before.
So instead of just kind of like going through life
Yeah.
and buying things on autopilot,
Right.
we're really thinking about each
yeah.
purchase.
What do I really need this?
Yeah.
Is this going to add value to my life?
And do I?
Or am I just buying it because it's on sale?
Yeah. Or because someone else has it.
Exactly.
Or because it's the latest trend or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all those external pressures
Yeah.
that we're bombarded with constantly.
So how do you kind of practically implement this mindful consumption?
Well, one thing that the sources talk about is prioritizing needs over wants. So, really distinguishing between
Right.
what you actually need to live a comfortable life
Yeah.
and what you simply desire,
Right.
And then they also emphasize quality over quantity.
Okay.
So instead of buying a bunch of cheap things
Mhm.
that might break or go out of style quickly,
Right.
investing in a few high-quality items
Okay.
that will last longer.
Yeah.
Like
a nice,
like a classic,
Yeah.
well-made coat
Right.
or a good pair of shoes.
as opposed to like the trendy stuff that's going to fall apart,
Exactly.
right? That you're going to have to
Yeah.
replace next season.
Exactly. So it's about being thoughtful
Yeah.
about your purchases,
I like this. This is good.
And then another tip that they mention
Okay.
is the pause before purchasing strategy.
Okay. What is that?
So basically, it's just about creating a little bit of space between the urge to buy something
Okay.
and actually making the purchase.
So, if you see something that you really want, take a day or two
Okay.
to think about it.
Don't just buy it right away.
Don't just impulse buy it.
Okay.
You know.
If you're like sleeping on it.
Yeah, sleep on it.
Yeah.
See if you still want it in
Okay.
a couple of days.
And a lot of times you're probably not going to.
A lot of times you won't.
Okay.
That initial excitement will have worn off.
Yeah. Or you realize that maybe you don't need it.
Yeah, or you realize you already have something similar.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's just about
Oh, yeah.
being more mindful
Okay. So then
and avoiding those impulse purchases,
what about
which can really add up.
retail therapy?
Oh, yeah.
Because I think a lot of people
That's a big one.
use shopping as a way to make themselves feel better.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's a quick fix.
Yeah.
Gives you that little dopamine hit.
Yeah, but then it fades pretty quickly.
Yeah, but it's fleeting.
And then you're left with, maybe even more stuff that you didn't really need.
And maybe even guilt
Yeah.
and buyer's remorse.
Right. So what are some alternatives to that?
Well, the sources suggest
Yeah.
finding other activities
Okay.
that bring you joy,
Okay.
that don't involve spending money.
So it's like finding healthier coping mechanisms.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
So things like going for a walk in nature,
Mm-hmm.
spending time with loved ones,
Yeah.
pursuing a hobby, things that nourish you.
Yeah, things that really fill you up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Instead of just temporarily distracting you.
Okay. All right.
So it's about finding those healthy outlets.
Moving right along.
Yeah.
Another key area that the source material highlights is financial awareness.
Absolutely.
And I feel like, so much of our consumption is tied to our financial situation.
Oh, it's inextricably linked.
Yeah, so this makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and the sources really emphasize the importance of understanding your finances,
Okay.
tracking your spending,
Yeah.
knowing where your money is going,
Uh-huh.
Creating a budget,
Right.
and really just being in control
Oopsie.
of your financial situation.
Okay.
Because when you're financially aware,
Yeah.
you're less likely to fall into those traps.
Of like the headless consumption.
Exactly.
Right, because you're like, oh, I'm not
And
gonna.
yeah, you're more conscious of your choices.
Right.
You're not just mindlessly swiping your credit card.
Right. And, they do briefly touch upon budgeting
Yeah,
and even automating saving.
absolutely.
But they don't go into like a ton of detail in this particular material.
Right.
But it's kind of like a jumping off point.
Yeah, it's an important foundation,
Yeah.
for building a simple life.
Okay, so we've tackled decluttering.
hmm
We've tackled mindful consumption.
Yeah.
We've tackled financial awareness.
What's next?
Okay, so the next thing that they emphasize is building strong relationships.
Oh, this is a big one.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is so important because,
Yeah.
what's the point of having this simplified life.
Mm.
If you feel lonely and isolated,
Exactly.
right?
You need that human connection.
So these relationships are fundamental
Absolutely.
to our happiness.
Yeah, they're essential.
And they're saying it's not about having, like,
Right.
a ton of friends.
It's not about the quantity.
It's about the quality.
It's about the quality of those connections.
Right.
Having a few close friends
Mhm.
who you can really rely on, who you can be yourself with.
Yeah. People who really get you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know?
And how do you go about, if someone's feeling like they want to cultivate stronger relationships,
Yeah.
what are some things that they can do?
Well, the sources suggest, making an effort to connect with people.
Okay.
Whether it's reaching out to old friends,
Uh-huh.
joining a club or a group,
Yeah.
volunteering,
Yeah.
just putting yourself out there. Okay.
And being open to meeting new people,
Okay. I like that.
And it's also about nurturing
Yeah.
the relationships that you already have,
Right.
making time for the people that you care about,
Yeah.
being present with them,
Yeah.
really listening to them,
Putting away your phone when you're with them.
Absolutely.
And really being there
being present.
in the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So
It's about quality time.
moving on.
Yeah.
Another strategy that's mentioned is embracing experiences over things,
Yes.
right? And I feel like this kind of ties into,
Yeah.
the whole minimalist mindset,
Absolutely.
right? And it's about, creating lasting memories as opposed to just, accumulating more stuff.
Yeah, because in the end,
Yeah.
it's the experiences that we remember.
Right.
It's the trips we take,
Mm-hmm.
the concerts we go to,
Yeah.
the time we spend with loved ones.
No?
Those are the things that really stay with us. Yeah. I can recall, a hiking trip that I took,
Mm-hmm.
a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Far more vividly than, most of the things that I purchased
Exactly.
around that same time period.
It's the memories that matter,
Yeah. It really is.
And the material possessions, they just kind of fade.
Yeah.
They lose their luster.
Yeah.
But the memories, they stay with you.
Okay.
So the sources really encourage people to prioritize experiences,
Okay.
you know?
Over material goods.
Yeah, whether it's travel or taking a class,
Yeah.
or just, doing something fun with your friends or family, it's those experiences that will enrich your life
Awesome.
in a way that stuff just can't.
So another thing that is mentioned is incorporating nature into our lives.
Nature is so important.
And this one feels really accessible.
Absolutely. And,
Just,
for most people.
yeah, easy for people to implement.
Right. Because even
Yeah.
if you live in a city,
Yeah.
there's usually a park or a green space nearby,
Right.
And the sources talk about how
Mm-hmm.
spending time in nature
Yeah.
has been shown to reduce stress,
Okay.
improve mood,
Yeah.
boost creativity,
Interesting.
Just,
Yeah.
it's good for us
I mean, it's true.
on so many levels.
Yeah, you feel better after you've been outside.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a simple but powerful way to enhance your well-being.
Okay. And another thing that's great about it is that it's free.
It's free.
Yeah.
You know?
It doesn't cost anything.
It's accessible to everyone,
Totally. All right.
So make time for nature.
We're going to make time for nature.
Yeah.
We're going to prioritize experiences over things. We're going to, build strong relationships,
Yeah.
declutter our spaces, be mindful of our consumption, become financially aware. Absolutely. It's a holistic approach.
And the final things that they emphasize are, cultivating mindfulness
Yes,
and actively seeking joy in our lives.
this is important.
Right.
Yeah.
And also giving back to our community.
Yes.
So let's talk about mindfulness first.
Okay.
I mean, what exactly does that mean in this context?
So in this context, mindfulness is really about
Yeah.
being present in the moment.
Okay.
Paying attention to your thoughts, your feelings,
Yeah.
your senses without judgment.
So kind of like slowing down,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Slowing down,
being more intentional.
being more intentional,
Yeah.
and really appreciating the simple things
Okay.
in life.
And how does one cultivate mindfulness?
Well, there are lots of different practices.
Yeah.
Meditation is a popular one,
Uh,
but it can also be as simple as, taking a few deep breaths
okay.
throughout the day,
Yeah.
or really savoring your food.
Or paying attention to the sensations of your body.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like bringing awareness to...
Yeah, it's about bringing awareness to the present moment
Okay.
instead of constantly dwelling on the past
Right.
or worrying about the future.
Yeah,
You know?
I like that.
And it's something that you can do
Yeah.
anytime, anywhere,
Okay.
you know?
All right, so then what about this idea of actively seeking joy?
Yeah. So this is about really thinking about what brings you joy,
Okay.
what lights you up,
Huh?
what makes you feel alive,
Yeah.
and then making sure that you're incorporating those things into your life on a regular basis,
Okay.
you know?
So it's not just like hoping that joy is going to happen to you.
Yeah. Don't just wait for it to happen.
You're like actively pursuing it.
Yeah, be proactive.
Right?
You know?
Okay. I like that.
Schedule it into your day.
Yeah.
If you have to.
Awesome. Okay. And then the last one,
Mhm.
giving back to our communities.
Oh, this is so powerful.
Okay.
In what way? Because when you give back to others, you're not only helping them,
Right.
but you're also helping yourself.
Yeah.
You know, it gives you a sense of purpose,
Yeah.
a sense of connection.
Uh-huh.
It boosts your mood.
Interesting.
You know, it's just,
Yeah.
it's a win-win.
It's like taking the focus off of yourself
Exactly.
and, putting it towards something bigger.
Yeah, it shifts your perspective.
Yeah.
You know?
And how does one go about giving back, I guess?
Well, there are so many ways.
Yeah.
You know, you can volunteer your time.
Mhm.
You can donate to a charity.
Yeah.
You can mentor someone.
Yeah.
You can just be kind and helpful
Right.
to the people around you.
Yeah.
You know?
Just small acts of kindness
Yeah.
can make a big difference.
Absolutely.
Right?
You know?
Yeah. I love that. Okay. So it seems like...
So find something that you're passionate about
Yeah.
and get involved.
Okay, so it seems like all these strategies that we've been talking about, while they seem kind of distinct, they're actually all kind of interconnected.
They are all interconnected.
Yeah, and they're all pointing towards this,
Yeah,
more intentional and fulfilling way of living.
absolutely.
So let's talk about the benefits.
Yeah.
Like, what are the payoffs here?
The payoffs are huge.
Okay,
You know?
I'm excited to hear about them.
They really are.
Okay.
And they affect both
Yeah.
our mental and emotional states
Mm-hmm.
as well as our practical day-to-day lives.
Okay.
You know?
Awesome.
So for instance,
Mm-hmm.
one of the biggest benefits
Yeah.
is reduced stress and anxiety.
Yeah.
You know, when you're not constantly surrounded by clutter
Yeah.
and you're not striving for more,
Hmm.
your mind naturally becomes calmer.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And you have more space
Right.
for peace and tranquility.
Less stuff. Less mental noise.
Exactly.
Right? It's like a weight has been lifted.
Yeah. And, the sources also talk about enhanced emotional well-being.
Okay.
When you're focused on the things that truly matter,
Mm-hmm.
your relationships,
Yeah.
your passions,
Mm-hmm.
your personal growth, you tend to feel more fulfilled,
Right. Content.
more content.
Happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're also less likely to experience
Mm-hmm.
feelings of loneliness and isolation.
Right, because you're nurturing those connections.
Exactly.
With people.
Yeah. And you're also building a strong support system.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that when challenges inevitably arise, you have people to lean on.
You're not facing them alone,
Right.
you know.
Okay, I like that.
And another benefit
Mm-hmm.
is increased free time.
Oh, yes, please.
Yes.
Sign me up for that.
When you say no to unnecessary commitments
Mm-hmm.
and you're not spending all your time shopping
Yeah.
and, keeping up with the Joneses,
Right.
you suddenly have more time for the things that you actually enjoy.
Yeah.
Hobby,
Hobbies, spending time with loved ones.
spending time with loved
What's
ones,
travel?
and traveling,
Reading.
whatever it is that lights you up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about reclaiming your time
Yeah. And your energy.
and your energy.
Yeah.
You know?
Because it takes energy to,
Yeah.
keep up with all that stuff.
It's exhausting,
Yeah.
And the
So-
sources also talk about
Mm-hmm.
improved focus and productivity.
Okay.
When you're not constantly bombarded with distractions
Yeah.
and your mind is clear,
Uh-huh.
you can actually get more done,
Makes sense.
And you're also less likely to experience decision fatigue,
Oh, yeah. That's a real thing.
which is that feeling of overwhelm
Yes.
you get from having to make too many choices.
That's why I only wear black.
Exactly.
One less decision to make.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, it's about simplifying your life.
So you can focus on what really matters.
And it sounds like, this journey towards a simpler lifestyle,
Mm-hmm.
while it might require some,
Effort.
some initial effort,
Yeah.
some adjustment.
Some adjustments. Yeah. And maybe some discomfort.
Yeah, stepping outside your comfort zone a little bit,
Right.
Um,
It really offers some significant rewards
Absolutely.
in terms of our, happiness and our overall quality of life.
It's an investment in your well-being.
Yeah, it's a shift in focus.
Yeah.
From merely accumulating more to intentionally being more.
Exactly.
Right.
And one of the things that they emphasize is this idea of intentionality,
Yes.
right? It's like being
It's about being mindful
Yeah.
about your choices.
Instead of just,
Yeah.
going through life on autopilot.
Instead of just reacting to things.
Right. Yeah.
Be proactive.
So the key takeaway here
Yeah.
is that simple living is not about deprivation or sacrifice.
Not at all.
It's about,
It's about abundance
yeah.
in a way.
Right.
Oh.
Abundance.
It's about having an abundance of
Yeah.
the things that truly matter.
Right.
Time,
Energy.
energy, connection.
Purpose.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this has been such an insightful deep dive
Yeah, it's been really interesting.
into the, principles
Yeah.
and practices of simple living.
Absolutely.
And it's become really clear to me that, it's not about,
Yeah.
giving everything up.
It's not about deprivation.
Right.
Oh.
It's about being really intentional.
It's about making conscious choices.
Yeah.